Three virus-hunting scientists win the Nobel Prize for decades of research into hepatitis C. With millions of lives saved and hopes for eradication, why is their work being rewarded now? And what can it teach us about the fight against COVID-19? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra in Doha. As the world battles a new and deadly pathogen, three scientists have been honored for their work on a virus that's ravaged people for decades, hepatitis C. Harvey Alter, Michael Horton and Charles Rice are sharing the Nobel Prize for Medicine. Research dating back to the 1960s successfully identified the virus, limited its spread and led to effective treatments. But as with the new coronavirus, there's no vaccine. Hepatitis C causes potentially fatal liver disease. It's transmitted through bodily fluids, including blood. Dr. Alter says while medical advances have improved our weapons against viruses, political will is what's needed to defeat them.
The issues now are really not science anymore. The science in hepatitis C has gotten to the point where we don't really need better drugs than we already have. We don't need better tests than we already have. What we need is the political will to eradicate it.
His fellow laureate, Professor Rice, believes it's unlikely hepatitis C will be eradicated by the WHO's target in 10 years. He says that's partly because many countries have banned research on chimpanzees, which is more effective than studies on rodents.
One of the challenges with vaccines is really sort of having a predictive model in which to, sort of test your ideas and your vaccine candidates. And certainly one of the aspects of that has slowed that process is the sort of inability to sort of use non-human primate models for those kinds of efficacy tests. So as you can probably glean from what's happening with the COVID-19 vaccine efforts, there are a myriad of different platforms that could potentially be used to develop a vaccine also against hepatitis C. But to actually take even one of those along the path that it takes to get it into the clinic is very difficult.
Let's bring in our guest. Stephen Griffith is an associate professor at Leeds University and chair of the virus division at the UK Microbiology Society. In Eastbourne, Philippa Easterbrook is an epidemiologist and scientist with the World Health Organization's Global Hepatitis Program. And joining us from Stowe in the US state of Vermont is Dr. Bob Arnot, former chief medical correspondent at NBC News. Welcome to the program. Stephen, quite fascinating the long journey it took the scientists to understand the disease and also the Swedish Royal Academy to recognize their legacy.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I've worked in the hepatitis C field for something like 20 years now. And of course, it was, first of all, discovered back in 1989. So it's probably a good time now to recognize that. Now we have these new drugs and different treatments for patients, which is a fantastic advance, and largely thanks to the prize winners that we're talking about today.
Philippa, the Swedish Royal Academy is known for taking really some time before recognizing the work done by scientists. Is it because that in this particular field you need more time to verify the scientific research and its impact?
Well, I think this is very much what we've seen in the whole history of the Nobel Prizes, that the recognition comes long after the original work was undertaken. But I think what we are now seeing with hepatitis C is the direct dividends of their accomplishments in identifying the causative virus, in identifying the diagnostic test, and then following that, the development of antiviral treatments that targeted hepatitis C. And so we are now being able to reap the full benefits and see the full outcome of their contributions. And we now have this highly effective treatment and a diagnostic test that was able early on to immediately screen blood products and stop that important transmission of the virus.
But when the names of the three scientists, Alter, Houghton, and Rice, came out, I think the first impression among many people was basically that these people made some seminal work, but then you get the impression that the achievement was somehow overlooked or overshadowed by other achievements. And this explains why I think it took the Swedish Academy that time to say, finally, you know what, it's about time to honor these people.
Well, actually, I think it's a very, very good thought. You know, just with so many things going on and so much molecular biology and stunning advances, was sort of left in a backwater for many years ago. You know, what they did back then could be done in a very short period of time now with genomic sequencing, fantastic speed. But, you know, the Nobel Prize Committee, I listened to them last night, and they did said, you know, we're very careful. You know, we really want to make sure that we get this one right. And, you know, what's intriguing about it is a lot of us lead our lives as regular researchers or medical doctors or broadcast journalists, and we have little achievements all the way along the way to really make us feel good about our careers. These people were out in the dark. I mean, they were laboring, having no idea if they'd ever find anything. And when you devote your lives to a cause like that, those many years, that much doubt, will you ever find anything? I think that's really the test of the Nobel. And remember, too, that first they knew there was something in the blood, but they had no idea what it was. And finally, the first researcher finds that. The second one then finds the antibodies so they can develop a test. And then the third one, years later, then finds the therapy. So very long string. But the importance of it, Hashem, which is so critical, is that there are still 70 million people in the world today who are infected with hepatitis C. And there are nearly 400,000 deaths, which is utterly and completely inexcusable given the availability of drugs, which are just too expensive for them in so many parts of Africa and Asia.
Stephen, we all love those discoveries that make the world a better place to live in. And what is interesting about these three scientists is that when you look at them, they were working in different worlds with different perspectives. Alter showed that the blood from the hepatitis patients could transmit the disease. And then Houghton isolated the genetic sequences. Rice provided the final bit of the puzzle by showing how the virus alone could cause the disease. I mean, it's quite remarkable how their separate works brought together that discovery that made an impeccable change in the world.
That's right, and it has taken a long time, and each of these discoveries preceded one another, and they were real trailblazers, really. And it I think, again, speaks to the difficulty of working with this particular virus. I mean, even since the discovery, it took something like 16, 17 years before we could even grow the virus in culture. So since then, which wouldn't have been happening apart from these three discoveries, that's when the drug discovery process really kicked in. And the track record of drug discovery against this virus has been not only fantastically successful, but also done in a very compressed period of time, considering other viruses that we've seen. And so these therapies really are a tremendous success for antiviral discovery. But it's really, as we've just heard, not the final stage. We'll have a lot of people infected with this virus. We have a lot of disproportionate disease in those less well-off countries. And we really still do need a vaccine. And of course, Michael Houghton's working very hard on that as we speak.
Philippa, why is this fight far from over? Because when you look at places like Egypt, Cameroon, Burundi, and Gabon, where the infection rate is really increasing throughout the year, why why is it at that particular stage?
Well, I think we now have this incredible tool of the highly effective treatments that are available at affordable price. But what needs to be in place to mount a response? You need a national plan, you need a laboratory infrastructure, you need a testing infrastructure, you need a supply chain, you need a procurement strategy, you need to train the healthcare workers. So this is what it takes to fight an epidemic. And of course, many of the same principles are applying with COVID. And I think many countries have stepped up very well. And there are some champion countries, one of which you referred to, Egypt, but also Rwanda and Georgia and Mongolia, as well as some high-income countries, including sort of Australia, France, and Scotland, England, and others, that have recognized that this is a public health problem and have mounted a response. And I think it's not all about the drugs. The drugs were the catalyst to enable the response. And what was also important was the rapid decline in the drug prices. I mean, it took 15, 20 years for us to see this in the HIV world. But in a very short space of time, from an all-time price of almost, $100,000 for a treatment, very quickly down to $1,000, and then $500 for a 12-week treatment course, and now less than $50. That is quite phenomenal. Mm-hmm. But all these other mechanisms need to be put in place, and the testing and the diagnosis is extremely important. Having high quality, low cost diagnostics and being able to make it simple and straightforward. And I think the other important thing is we don't need specialists to be the only ones treating this. This is a very straightforward, very well tolerated regimen. And so as we learned with HIV, if we're to scale up and get people access to treatment, we need to train frontline health workers on the simple steps to administer the treatment. So I think it's when all these things come together, as they have done so well in Egypt, which has screened 60 million, more than 60 million, and treated more than 3 million. These are the examples and the models that other countries need to be following.
Bob, this comes against the backdrop of the somber moment where humanity is grappling with COVID-19 and everybody asking the same question: when are we going to find a vaccine? But at the same time, when you look at the time that took all those three scientists, people are saying, oh no, we don't want that to happen now. We don't want to wait for 30 years to find a vaccine for COVID-19.
Well, it's quite interesting. I thought that statement from the World Health Organization there was as elegant and eloquent as I've ever heard anybody on television in terms of medicine and healthcare. With COVID, the World Health Organization was unfortunately defunded by the U.S. And I think what we've just heard outlines why it's so critically important for the U.S. to stay in the game and continue that funding, because of the intricate balance and dance that it takes to be able to train healthcare workers and get testing up, get into places like Burundi that may have parts of the country that are still in civil war. I mean, it's a very tough thing to do, and it's all of this infrastructure and training that takes that initial work and really puts it into play. Now, what is interesting is, you see with the president just last night, he was taking remdesivir, which was developed for hepatitis C. So he's the beneficiary of this work. And you see the tremendous speed, that there are now something like 140 vaccine candidates. There are probably 7 or so that are now in stage 3 trials, producing lots and lots of antibody. President had a new therapy. It's for a company called Regeneron, multiple antibodies. And just to make that clear, when you give somebody a vaccine, let's say that this is the vaccine, then you develop antibodies to whatever it's presenting. In this case, it's the spike virus. Well, what this Regeneron treatment does is it gives you pre-made antibodies, as if you've had the vaccine, or as if you've taken some serum from somebody who's been affected. You give that to somebody, and it may be why the president's so well now. It still has a troublesome course before we'll really find out. But just the great speed, I think you're saying, Hashem, in terms of all of the molecular biology. is really the infant of this work that was done by these tremendous researchers.
Before we continue, let's have a look at where do we stand when it comes to the hunt for COVID-19 vaccine. Vaccines can take years to be approved, but it's hoped some being developed for COVID-19 could be available next year. The vast majority are still in the preclinical stage, being tested on animals, not people. About 40 are in phase 1, where they are given to a handful of people, or phase 2, where they are tested on hundreds. Phase 3 is reported to have 11 promising prospects, where thousands of trial patients receive the drug to confirm its safety and check for any side effects. Vaccines developed by the pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca in conjunction with Oxford University and another by US biotech firm Moderna are at stage 3. China's given limited approval for use of a vaccine developed by Sinovac after initial tests on soldiers, and President Vladimir Putin gave the go-ahead for a Russian vaccine in August, before phase 3 testing had even begun. Stephen, Michael Houghton is also part of a team working to produce vaccine for COVID-19. And this is what he had to say. He said that basically it's about time to focus on virology, immunology, and infectious disease research. That's the only way out for us to be able to crack the code of COVID-19.
Sure. I mean, I think it's worth saying that a vaccine against a virus like hepatitis C is actually quite a different concept to a vaccine against something like SARS coronavirus 2. The nature of the virus is quite different in the way that they're very much more variable for hepatitis C. There's a sort of tougher challenge there in terms of diversity. Of course, what we're seeing with SARS is that the race to get that done very quickly is an absolute necessity. However, I think we need to be absolutely certain through the outcomes of randomized controlled phase 3 trials that the vaccines that do effectively get used in the wider population are safe and are efficacious and are fit for what exactly we want them to do, and whether that's protecting high-risk groups or what have you. That's tremendously important to understand. So I think we are due, I think, in an unprecedented rush, not rush in terms of more haste, less speed, but rush in terms of a tremendous achievement to see some of the outcomes of those phase 3 trials. We hope that they're promising.
Philippa, I mean, this COVID-19 has been a wake-up call in a way or another for us and for the expert community, for people like yourself. And this is raising a concern now among people, basically saying that it's about time for organizations like the World Health Organization to redirect efforts into investing more into antiviral drugs, because the next pandemic could be more devastating than COVID-19.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I'd just like to pick up on one other point. Clearly the science has been absolutely fundamental to the vaccine development, and it's just, garnered a real ferment of activity, which is important. But we mustn't forget about access. That, ultimately we need to have a system in place that is going to allow where the vaccine is, where the greatest need is, the vaccine is made available. So I think the initiative that WHO has established with the COVAX of a consortium to ensure that there's forecasting of where the need is going to be and how to enable vaccines for the low and middle income countries. The high income countries have established bilateral agreements and have secured a potential vaccine supply chain. But if we're going to address this epidemic, it has to be done with as part of a global consortium. And so that is what WHO is ensuring, is that in addition to the high income countries having access to vaccines, we ensure all the low and middle income countries do so also. And the same applies to the drugs, and the same applies to the diagnostics. So good forecasting, good procurement, good supply chain, and a multilateral partnership.
Bob, the scientists you spoke about earlier, those devoting their lives for the sake of humanity, those who helped us sequence diseases in a matter of weeks, making testing available as soon as possible. if we follow into the footsteps of those people, do you think that alternatives like monoclonal antibodies could be the only best hope for us in the coming weeks or months to crack the code of COVID-19?
You know, it's a great question. We sort of won't know until we find out what happens with the president. You know, he's not in the period of the disease that's most critical yet, so we really don't know whether it was given in vain. If this should work, it could really, you know, as you point out, crack the code. What I would say is that, you know, the vaccine is overrated and it only has to be 50% effective. As the head of the CDC said a couple of weeks ago, you know, right now, the masks, good masks, are up to 97% effective. You have what's called an N95 equivalent mask, hundreds of millions being made, many more available, and you practice distancing, you can really beat this. You know, we saw the pandemonium of the White House with, you know, failed testing, using testing instead of distancing and masks. We saw what not to do, but, you know, there's great hope right now with distancing, not being in closed indoor spaces, that this could work out. But you make a very good point that, you know, Regeneron's monoclonal antibody, should this work, it could be a huge breakthrough, because we haven't had anything early in the disease to be able to stop this race into this terrible cytokine storm that's killed so many people.
Stephen, you're a scientist, but I'm afraid I'm going to take you to a philosophical angle here. What's the purpose of science if science is not equally benefiting humanity? The reason why I'm asking you this question is people are saying, basically, people mostly affected by diseases these days are in poor countries, in sub-Saharan Africa, in Asia. And ultimately what you see is that sophisticated labs are stationed in the West, where they have all the luxury of advanced technology and financial investments. Ultimately, those suffering most are getting nothing.
Well, I'm not sure I completely agree with that. I think that there's a growing recognition, certainly in the UK through organisations like the Wellcome Trust and other UKRI-funded initiatives to actively pursue diseases that are neglected, that have unmet need. More developed countries do have better infrastructure and better resource. And I think it's important that they don't just focus on diseases that affect them. And there's certainly a huge move towards that, funding through agencies such as the Gates, WHO, the Wellcome Trust here in the UK and elsewhere, the UKRI. There's a huge increasing focus on neglected tropical diseases, infectious diseases in particular. And of course, the recent outbreaks of things like Zika virus, Ebola, and now, of course, SARS coronavirus 2 is making us recognize that that is of tremendous importance worldwide. And these issues do obviously affect lower and middle income countries more adversely than they do in other countries. But actually, it should be for a world benefit. And I think that initiatives like CEPI and there should be equivalent initiatives for antiviral drugs, perhaps, ought to be better coordinated. If you think about the value for money, how much this pandemic has cost, we could invest a bit more in those sorts of preventative measures. But yes, absolutely, let's share that infrastructure. Let's make sure the research benefits all of mankind. I think we do a good job. For example, in the Ebola outbreak, there was a lot of help given to the right places at the right time. So I think it's important we move together.
I see your point. Philippa, do you think it's about time to rethink the priorities? Let's start tackling the most aggressive diseases that we have and leave those less aggressive later, because we don't have enough resources to tackle with all those problems at the same time.
Well, I think also picking up on the theme of the last question about sharing skills and capacity. I mean, I think certainly we do not have in any way the monopoly on skills and expertise in the high income settings. And I think, you know, what we've seen with the COVID response is really some very strong exemplary responses in low income settings, building on their experience of pandemic preparedness from Ebola and other outbreaks, and really with the establishment of good diagnostic infrastructure and research capacity as well. So I think that's been very empowering and inspiring to see that leadership.
Thank you.
But I think, you know, I think one other important point is really the power of partnerships, be it hepatitis C or COVID. We need civil society, we need government leadership, we need the scientists, we need the clinicians, and it's the coordination, the deft coordination of that in whatever best way it should be deployed.
Thank you.
That is going to be so important.
Thank you, Philippa. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Philippa, Easterbrook, Bob Arnot, Stephen, Griffin, I really appreciate your contribution to the program. Thank you. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem Ahelbarra, and the whole team here. Bye for now.